My kids told me to choose between them and my niece. 1. I walked into my house and heard yelling before I even shut the door. My kids were already at it, and the moment they saw who was behind me, the shouting exploded. Rosa stood there, shaking, eyes still red from crying. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Mike glared at her and said, "Why is she here? This is our week." Mara crossed her arms. "Dad, I swear if she ruins this trip." And just like that, we were already in a war. I tried to calm everyone down. "Guys, please, not today. Rosa just needs a place to stay tonight." But they didn't care. They never care when it comes to Rosa. They hate her, not for anything she did, but because she exists. Because she's the cousin who ruins everything, the one who always ends up crying, the one who takes up space they think belongs to them. And tonight they were ready to tear her apart, but they didn't know what I knew. I need to back up here, because none of this makes sense without understanding how we got to this moment, standing in my hallway on a Thursday night at 9:30, with my 2 teenagers radiating fury, and my 14-year-old niece pressed against the wall like she was trying to disappear into the paint. This didn't start tonight. This started years ago, back when my marriage was still limping along and Rosa was just a quiet 8-year-old who showed up at our door sometimes with her backpack and her sad eyes and her careful way of moving through our house like she was afraid of taking up too much space. Rosa is my brother Danny's daughter. Danny, who I shared a bedroom with growing up, who taught me how to ride a bike and throw a punch and talk to girls. Danny, who somewhere between high school and his mid-30s became someone I barely recognized anymore. He married Linda when Rosa was 3, after Rosa's biological mother left and never looked back. Linda seemed nice enough at first, quiet, a little nervous, but over the years, something curdled in that house. Maybe it was money. Danny could never keep a job longer than 18 months. Maybe it was the drinking that started slow and then wasn't slow anymore. Maybe it was just that some people shouldn't be parents and they found each other and made everything worse. Rosa started coming to our house when she was 8. Back then, I was still married to Sarah, though barely. And Sarah tolerated Rosa's presence because it was the right thing to do, and Sarah always did the right thing when people were watching. Rosa would sit at our kitchen table doing homework in this careful silence, or curl up in the corner of the couch with whatever book she was reading, and sometimes I'd forget she was there until I'd hear her small voice asking if she could please have a glass of water. She said, "Please for everything, please and thank you, and sorry, always sorry." Mike was 12 then, Mara was 10, and they didn't like Rosa from the start. I couldn't figure out why at first. She never took their things or got in their way or demanded attention. She was practically invisible, but kids have their own logic, their own territorial instincts, and Rosa was an intruder, someone who didn't belong, someone who took up space in their house during their time with their parents. After the divorce 2 years ago, it got worse, so much worse, because suddenly, time with me became this precious commodity that had to be scheduled and negotiated and divided up like we were splitting assets. Mike got his weeks, Mara got her weeks, and God forbid Rosa's crises happened to fall during their time, because then it became theft. Every minute I spent helping Rosa was a minute stolen directly from them. Every night she stayed at my place was a night that should have belonged exclusively to them. I tried to explain, tried to make them understand that Rosa's home life was chaos, that Danny and Linda's screaming matches had gotten so bad the neighbors had called the cops twice in 6 months, that sometimes Rosa just needed somewhere safe to sleep. But teenagers don't want to hear about other people's problems when they're convinced their own problems are the center of the universe. And maybe that's not fair to them. Maybe they're just kids too. Kids who lived through a divorce and custody schedules and all the little betrayals that come with parents who couldn't make it work. Maybe I'm asking too much. But tonight, standing in that hallway with Rosa trembling behind me, I didn't have the luxury of maybe. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know because they'd started screaming the second they saw her, was what had happened 10 minutes before I walked through that door. My phone had rung while I was driving home from work, about 15 minutes from the house, Rosa's name on the screen. And when I answered, all I heard was sobbing. Not crying, sobbing. The kind that sounds like drowning, like the world is ending, like she couldn't get enough air. "Uncle Jack," she gasped between sobs. "Uncle Jack, please, please." I pulled over immediately, right into a gas station parking lot, hazards on, hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "Rosa, slow down, breathe. Tell me what happened." "They're fighting again." Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Dad threw a plate and it broke, and Mom was screaming about money and he just kept yelling and throwing things, and I got scared. I got so scared and I ran." "Where are you right now?" "I went to Uncle Nick's house, but he's not home, and I knocked and knocked, but nobody answered, and I don't know what to do." She was crying harder now. "I can't go back there. I can't. Please don't make me go back there." Nick is Danny's younger brother, and his wife Julie had been in and out of the hospital for the last 8 months fighting cancer. Of course he wasn't home. Of course Rosa had run their there first. It was only 2 blocks from Danny's house, close enough that she could get there fast. She told me later she'd run barefoot, just grabbed her backpack and ran in her socks because she couldn't find her shoes in the chaos, and she just needed to get out. Stay exactly where you are, I told her. I'm coming right now, don't move, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I broke at least 4 traffic laws getting there, ran 2 yellow lights that were basically red, cut off a minivan making a turn, didn't care. When I pulled up to Nick's house, Rosa was sitting on his front steps, hugging her backpack to her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her face was blotchy and swollen. Her socks were torn and dirty. When she saw my car, she stood up so fast she stumbled, and then she was climbing into my back seat and curling into the corner, and I could see her in the rearview mirror, just trying to make herself as small as possible, trying to take up as little space as she could. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're safe now, I said, even though I knew it was only partially true. She was safe from Danny and Linda, but I was bringing her into a different kind of war. The camping trip. The goddamn camping trip that had been planned for 6 weeks. I'd marked it on the calendar in red, got the time off work approved, made reservations at the campground. It was supposed to be my week with Mike and Mara, and we were supposed to leave Friday morning at 6 a.m. sharp for this place 3 hours north that they'd been excited about for weeks. They'd been talking about it constantly, the hiking trails, the lake, the fact that there was supposedly no cell service so they could actually disconnect for once, Dad. Like, really disconnect. It was supposed to be this perfect father-kids bonding experience. The thing that might close some of the distance that had grown between us since the divorce. And now, Rosa was in my back seat, needing shelter, needing safety, and I already knew exactly how this was going to play out. So when I walked through that door with Rosa behind me and heard the yelling that had already started before I even got my keys out, I wasn't surprised. When Mike demanded, "Why is she here? This is our week," it wasn't really a question. It was an accusation, an indictment, proof that I was failing them again. But they didn't know. They didn't know that 10 minutes earlier, Rosa had called me sobbing so hard she could barely speak, that her parents were screaming again, breaking things again, that she ran barefoot out of the house to her Uncle Nick's place and he wasn't home, that his wife was in the hospital and he couldn't take her, that she had no one. So I picked her up. I brought her in. I let her sit in the back seat quietly, holding on to her backpack like it was a life vest. But my kids didn't want to hear any of that. Mara pointed at her like she was pointing at a cockroach. "She always does this. Every time. Every freaking time." Rosa looked down at her hands. She whispered, "I can sleep on the couch. I won't talk. I won't be a problem." But Mike snapped, "You already are a problem." Then he shoved past her, shoulder checking her like she was just an object in his way. Something inside me cracked a little. I told them, "We're leaving for the trip at 6 a.m. Can you please just be kind for one night?" But they weren't listening. Not to me. Not to anything. And what followed was 3 hours of absolute chaos. 3 hours that felt like 3 years. Mike kept bursting out of his room every 20 minutes with a new argument, a new demand, a new accusation. Mara would appear behind him like a shadow, amplifying everything he said, adding her own spin. The house became this pressure cooker of resentment and rage and teenage fury that had been building for months, maybe years, and was finally exploding. They paced, they slammed doors, they threw blame at each other and at me, and especially at Rosa. They whined and complained and rolled their eyes and muttered insults just loud enough to be heard. Every accusation was a knife. Rosa was manipulating me. Rosa was lying about how bad things were at home. Rosa was trying to steal their father. Rosa was the reason our family was broken. Rosa, Rosa, Rosa. Her name became a curse word, spat out with venom. And the worst part? Every time one of them screamed, Rosa flinched. Every time a door slammed, her shoulders hunched closer to her ears. Every time they said her name with that particular hatred, she seemed to fold in on herself a little more. She sat on that couch, getting smaller and smaller, trying to disappear, and she kept asking in this tiny voice, "Should I go? I'll go back. I'll figure something out." And every time she said it, my stomach twisted into a tighter knot, because I knew where back was, and it sure as hell wasn't somewhere a 14-year-old should return alone at night. I knew it was Danny and Linda, probably still fighting, or maybe passed out drunk, or maybe both. I knew it was broken dishes on the floor and holes in the walls, and that particular kind of silence that comes after violence, heavy and dangerous, where anything could reignite the fire. I knew it was a house where a child didn't feel safe enough to stay, where running barefoot into the night seemed like the better option. Still, the kids didn't stop, couldn't stop, or wouldn't stop. Around 11:30, after hours of this, Mike came storming out of his room one final time. Mara was right behind him. They planted themselves in front of me with identical expressions of righteous fury, and I could see they'd reached some kind of agreement, made some kind of pact. Mike spoke first, his voice hard and cold. "She's not coming with us." "We're not discussing this right now," I said, exhausted beyond measure. "Yeah, we are." His face was red, said. We're discussing it right now because we're not getting in a car with her tomorrow morning. We're not spending a week dealing with her crying and her drama and her bullshit. Mike, no, he was properly shouting now. She's not coming with us. Mara stepped closer, her voice deadly calm. Dad, pick. You take your real kids or you take her. Rosa froze. Her face went pale. Every drop of color drained out of her skin, and she looked like she might pass out or throw up or both. And that was the moment everything snapped into place. The shouting stopped. The house went still. And all three of them stared at me, waiting, demanding, expecting me to choose. My own kids, my niece, who had nowhere else to go, a trip that was supposed to be fun, a week I was supposed to have with them. I felt myself shaking. I said, I'm not sending Rosa back to that house. But Mike stepped closer, getting right in my space. So you're choosing her, Mara added. Just say it. Say you love her more than us. Rosa whispered, stop, please. But they talked over her, their voices rising again, drowning out her small plea. Say it, Dad, say it. And something broke in Menot out of anger, not out of spite, but out of a sudden crystalline realization about what they were actually asking me to do. They weren't asking me to choose between my kids and my niece. They were asking me to abandon a child who had no one else. They were asking me to send a 14-year-old girl back into an unsafe situation because their camping trip was more important than her immediate safety. They were asking me to prove that blood alone determined worth, that my obligation to them automatically trumped any obligation to anyone else, including someone desperate and scared and sitting right in front of me begging for help. So I grabbed my keys from the table. Get in the car, I said quietly. Both kids smirked for half a second, thinking they'd won, thinking they'd successfully called my bluff and I was going to drive Rosa somewhere else, anywhere else, as long as it wasn't with us. Until I added, I'm taking you back to your mom's. The smirks died instantly, completely, like someone had flipped a switch. What? Mara's voice cracked. No, 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 no. You're taking her? Mike's face went from red to purple. You're serious? I opened the front door. Let's go. Get whatever you need for the rest of the week, they yelled. Oh God, did they yell. They argued and screamed and told me I was insane. They told me Rosa was manipulating me, that she'd poisoned me against them, that she'd always been trying to destroy our family. They told me I was ruining their week, their lives, everything. They told me I was being dramatic. They told me I was the worst father in the world. They told me they hated me, but I didn't budge. I stood there holding that door open, keys in my hand, and waited. It took 25 minutes to get them both into the car. They packed with theatrical fury, slamming drawers and throwing things into bags, and maintaining a constant stream of accusations. When we finally got out to the car, the atmosphere was nuclear, toxic, the kind of anger that feels like a physical presence pressing down on you from all sides. The whole ride was a storm, insults, anger, betrayal dripping from every word. The 35-minute drive to Sarah's house felt like 35 hours. Mara cried angry tears in the back seat. Mike stared out the window, radiating contempt so thick I could almost see it. At one point, about halfway there, Mara screamed, I hope she replaces us then. I hope that's what you want. And Mike added, voice flat and cold, yeah, go be her dad instead. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My throat had closed up, and I knew if I opened my mouth I didn't know what would come out. Rage or grief or apologies for things I hadn't done wrong, or explanations they wouldn't hear anyway. So I just drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel, and let them hate me. When I dropped them off, they slammed the doors so hard the car shook, didn't look back, just grabbed their bags and stormed up to Sarah's front door. I watched Sarah open it, confusion on her face, watched my kids push past her into the house. Sarah looked out at me still sitting in my car, and her expression shifted from confusion to accusation in real time. I shook my head once and drove away before she could come out and demand explanations I didn't have the energy to give. And as I drove back home, the silence hit me harder than the shouting, so much harder, because now I was alone with my thoughts, and my thoughts were a spiral of doubt. Had I just destroyed my relationship with my kids? Was this the moment they'd remember forever, the night Dad chose someone else? Had I failed them somehow? Failed to teach them empathy and compassion and basic human decency? Or had I failed Rosa all those other times when I'd tried too hard to accommodate my kids' feelings instead of standing firm? When had I become the villain in everyone's story? Because I knew what waited inside. I knew Rosa would be sitting on that couch, still shaking, still terrified, still convinced she'd ruined everything. When I walked in, Rosa was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, eyes wide like she was bracing for bad news. Like she was bracing for me to tell her I'd changed my mind, that she had to leave, that she really was too much of a burden. And when she saw I was alone, she froze. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She just stared at me like no one in her entire life had ever stayed. She whispered, "You chose me?" I sat down across from her, looked at this kid who'd been through hell tonight and probably probably 1,000 nights before it. This kid who said sorry for existing and thank you for basic kindness, and please like it was a prayer. I said softly, pack your bag, we're leaving in the morning. Her lip trembled, her eyes filled with tears that she tried to blink back, and then she said 5 words that cut deeper than anything my kids yelled. 5 words that made me realize just how broken this whole situation was. Thank you for not leaving. And for the first time all night, the house went quiet. We left at 6 a.m. like planned. Rosa in the passenger seat, quiet and disbelieving, clutching her backpack in her lap like she was afraid I'd change my mind any second. The drive was peaceful, surreal even. Just the two of us and the early morning road and the slow sunrise painting everything gold. The campground was beautiful. Dense pine trees and a crystal clear lake and hiking trails that wound through hills covered in wildflowers. We spent 3 days there, and I watched Rosa slowly unfurl like a flower that had been kept in the dark too long. She smiled, actually smiled, this real genuine smile that lit up her whole face. She laughed when a squirrel stole our granola bar right off the picnic table. She asked questions about the trees and the birds and the different kinds of clouds. She helped set up the tent and cook over the fire and wash dishes in the lake. She was so careful, so grateful, so determined not to be a burden that it broke my heart a little more every single day. My phone stayed mostly silent. One text from Sarah the first night. What the hell happened? The kids are furious and won't tell me anything. I responded, not now, I'll explain later. 3 texts from Mike over the 3 days, all variations of hope you're having fun with your new favorite and don't bother coming back. Nothing from Mara at all, which somehow felt worse. But I put the phone away, focused on Rosa, on teaching her how to skip rocks across the lake and identify animal tracks and build a fire that actually stayed lit. On the way, her eyes went wide when we saw a deer at dusk, on how she actually ate full meals instead of picking at her food like she usually did, on the fact that she slept through the night without waking up from nightmares. On the morning of day 4, we were sitting by the lake eating breakfast when Rosa said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. Why did you bring me instead of them? She was staring at the water, not looking at me. I mean, I'm glad you did, but they're your kids, real kids, and I'm just, don't finish that sentence. I set my coffee down. Rosa, you're not just anything. You're my niece, your family, and you needed help, but they hate me now even more, and they probably hate you too. I ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything. They made a choice. They told me to pick between helping you and making them happy. And yeah, I picked helping you, because you needed help, because you're a kid who was scared and alone and had nowhere else to go. That's not complicated. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly, I almost didn't hear, nobody's ever picked me before, and that broke something in me that I didn't know could break. We came back home on Sunday afternoon. I dropped Rosa off at my place and immediately drove to Sarah's to face whatever was waiting. Mike and Mara refused to come out of their rooms. Sarah met me at the door with her arms crossed and her face set in that expression I remembered from the worst days of our marriage. You want to explain what the hell you were thinking? I explained. All of it. Rosa's call, the state she was in, the choice the kids had forced, the decision I'd made. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from anger to something more complicated. When I finished, she sighed. Look, I get it. Rosa needed help. But Jack, you can't just abandon your kids every time. I didn't abandon them. I brought them here to you. They were safe. They had a place to stay. Rosa didn't. They feel abandoned. They feel like you chose a niece over your own children. I chose to help a child in crisis over enabling our kids' cruelty. That landed hard. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Cruelty? What would you call it? They told Rosa she was a problem to her face. Mike physically shoved her. They spent 3 hours screaming at her while she sat there flinching and asking if she should leave. They gave me an ultimatum designed to force me to send a 14-year-old back into an unsafe situation. What would you call that? Sarah didn't have an answer. Or if she did, she didn't share it. It took 2 weeks before Mike and Mara would speak to me. Even then, it was only through text. Cold, brief messages. Fine, and whatever, and if you say so. They came back for their next scheduled week, but the house felt like a minefield. Every conversation was strained. Every interaction felt fragile. They moved around Rosa like she was toxic, never speaking to her, barely acknowledging her existence. Rosa noticed. Of course she noticed. She tried to make herself even smaller, even more invisible, stopped asking for anything, started sleeping over less, even though things at Danny's house hadn't gotten any better. Then, about 3 weeks after the camping trip, I got a call from a social worker named Janet Morrison. She was calling about Rosa. Apparently, one of Rosa's teachers had noticed bruises and reported it. CPS had opened an investigation. They'd been to Danny's house twice, found evidence of ongoing domestic violence, substance abuse, unsafe living conditions. They were building a case. We're going to need family members who might be able to take temporary placement, Janet said. Your brother mentioned you've helped with Rosa before. I'll take her, I said immediately. However long she needs, I'll take her. The process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of paperwork and home visits and background checks and interviews continues. 6 weeks of Mike and Mara's increasing hostility as it became clear this wasn't temporary. 6 weeks of Rosa crying herself to sleep because she thought she was destroying my family. When the temporary custody order came through, making me Rosa's guardian until the case was resolved, Mike exploded. "You're actually doing this? You're actually replacing us?" "Nobody's replacing anybody." "Yes, you are. You're choosing her over us. Again. You're making her more important than us. Again." Mara was crying. "Why do you love her more? What did we do wrong?" And I realized they genuinely didn't understand. They couldn't see the difference between loving someone and helping someone who desperately needs help. They couldn't see that my taking Rosa in wasn't about loving her more. It was about her having nowhere else to go. I tried to explain, tried to make them understand that Rosa wasn't competition, that love wasn't a finite resource, that helping someone in crisis wasn't the same as abandoning them, but they were too hurt, too angry, too deep in their own narrative where they were the victims, and Rosa was the villain who'd stolen their father. Sarah called me a week after the custody order. "The kids want to stay with me full time." My heart stopped. "What?" "They don't want to come to your house anymore. Not while Rosa's there. They said it's too hard, that they can't relax, that everything's about her now." "Sarah, I can't just— I'm not saying you have to. I'm telling you what they want. Jack, they're asking me to go back to court, to modify custody, to make it so they only have to see you on neutral ground without Rosa." I sat down hard. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious. And honestly, I think you need to consider it, because right now, you're losing them. Every day, they're getting angrier. Every day, they're pulling further away. Is that really worth it? Is it worth it? Is saving one child worth losing 2 others? How do you even answer that question? How do you weigh that kind of math?" I didn't have an answer. Still don't, most days. The court date was set for 2 months out. In the meantime, Mike and Mara stopped coming over entirely, stopped responding to most of my texts. When they did respond, it was one-word answers, cold, distant, like I was a stranger. Rosa knew. She always knew. "I should go," she told me one night. "I should ask them to place me somewhere else. Your kids need you more than I do." "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't do that. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. But if I wasn't here, if you weren't here, you'd be in a foster home with strangers, or back with Danny and Linda, or worse. You're staying," she cried, thanked me, apologized, and I realized how fucked up it was that a kid who'd been through what she'd been through still felt like she had to apologize for existing. 1 week before the court date, something changed. I got a call from Janet, the social worker. "Mr. Torres, I need you to come to my office. There's something you need to see." I went. She pulled up a video on her computer. Security footage from Rosa's school from 2 months ago, right before the camping trip incident. It showed Rosa sitting in an empty classroom during lunch, and one of her teachers, Mrs. Chen, sitting down next to her. "Rosa," Mrs. Chen said in the video, "I need you to tell me the truth. What's happening at home?" And Rosa, my quiet niece who never wanted to burden anyone, broke down, told Mrs. Chen everything. About the fighting, about Danny throwing things, about Linda screaming, about the nights she'd hide in her closet because the yelling got so bad, about the time Danny grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises because she'd accidentally knocked over his beer, about feeling like she was drowning and no one could see. "Why didn't you tell someone sooner?" Mrs. Chen asked gently. "Because Uncle Jack is the only one who ever helped," Rosa said through tears. "And his kids already hate me for existing. If I made it worse, if I caused more problems, he might stop too, and then I'd have no one." The video ended. I sat there staring at the blank screen. "There's more," Janet said. She showed me photos, documentation, medical records from a hospital visit 6 months ago where Rosa had been treated for a sprained wrist. Danny had grabbed her during a fight and twisted it. A police report from one of the domestic disturbance calls where Rosa had been interviewed and said everything was fine because she was too scared to tell the truth. Text messages between Rosa and a friend where she talked about being scared to go home. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because your ex-wife's lawyer has been arguing that Rosa is manipulative, that she's exaggerating her home situation to get attention, that she's driving a wedge between you and your children intentionally. I want you to have the full picture before you go into that courtroom." The full picture. The full picture was that Rosa had been surviving abuse for years, that she'd been protecting her parents by staying quiet, that the only time she'd ever asked for help was that night when things got so bad she couldn't stay silent anymore, that my kids had looked at this terrified, traumatized child and decided she was the enemy. The court hearing was brutal. Sarah's lawyer painted me as someone who'd abandoned his children for a niece, who'd prioritized his brother's kid over his own, who'd missed important events and moments because I was playing hero. Mike and Mara sat in the courtroom and didn't look at me once. Then my lawyer presented the evidence, the videos, the photos, the documentation of what Rosa had been living with, the testimony from Mrs. Chen about the bruises she'd seen, the weight Rosa had lost, the way she flinched at loud noises, the statement from Janet about the conditions at Danny's house. The judge listened to all of it, looked at my kids, looked at me. "I'm not modifying custody," she said finally. Mr. Torres had a legal and moral obligation to provide shelter to a child in his care who was experiencing abuse. His children are old enough to understand that sometimes doing the right thing is uncomfortable. Family therapy is ordered for all parties. This court is adjourned. Mike and Mara walked out without saying goodbye. That was 8 months ago. We've been in family therapy ever since. It's slow, painful. Some weeks feel like progress. Some weeks feel like we're back at square one. Mike is starting to come around, slowly. He actually had a full conversation with Rosa last month about a video game they both like. Mara is still holding on to her anger like a shield, but she showed up for dinner last week and stayed for 2 hours. Rosa is thriving, actually thriving. She's put on weight. She smiles more. She joined the art club at school. She has friends. She doesn't flinch at loud noises anymore. Danny and Linda's parental rights were terminated 3 months ago. I have full custody now. Rosa has her own room, her own space, her own life that isn't about surviving. But Mike and Mara still struggle with it, still feel like they lost something that night. And maybe they did. Maybe they lost the version of their father who would choose their comfort over someone else's safety. Maybe they lost the illusion that family only counts when it's convenient. I don't know if I made the right choice that night. Some days I'm sure I did. Some days I lie awake wondering if there was another way. Some perfect solution where nobody got hurt and everyone understood. But most days I just know this. I looked at a terrified child who had nowhere to go and I gave her somewhere to go. And I'd do it again. If you made it this far, thanks for reading. I don't know if this story has a neat ending. Real life usually doesn't. But Rosa's safe now. My kids are talking to me again, even if it's complicated. And we're all trying to figure out how to be a family that includes more than just the people we expected. Maybe that's enough.